Welcome to the ninth edition of the Print Charcha. I'm Shubhangi Misra, senior correspondent with the Print, and today we are going to discuss a very important issue. We are going to delve into the issue of the gaps in the implementation of the PoSH Act. The PoSH Act is a 2013 law. It's called Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. It was implemented after superseding Vishakha guidelines, which had been implemented or which came into being in 1997. And the purpose of the law was to keep sexual harassment at workplaces in check as well as prevented. So 11 years after this law was implemented, I went around investigating its implementation in various spheres. I started with Hindi cinema, went on to sports, to a cultural institute, and I am still exploring other places to check the implementation of this very important act. I have found that it has been very lousily implemented and women are still struggling to get their voices heard. So today I have put together an esteemed panel of guests who are going to throw light on this issue further. With me are Sana Hakim, who is the founding partner of Equilibrio Advisory. She is also active in various internal committees in various production houses in Mumbai. The second guest I have is Ms. Vinta Nanda. She is a senior director, editor of the Daily Eye, and she was one of the strongest and fiercest voices in the MeToo movement of 2017 from the Hindi film industry. Then we have senior advocate in Supreme Court, Gopal Sankaranaryanan, with us. He will tell us about the implementation of the PoSH Act in sports and various federations. And last but not the least, our youngest panelist, Somabha Bandopadhay, who's the co-founder of unmute.help, which is a resource center focused on providing performing artists the necessary resources and empower them to come out with their stories of sexual harassment and get proper recourse. I am going to open the panel by talking to Mr. Sankaranaryanan first. He is a senior advocate in the Supreme Court, like I told you. And right now, the biggest story in India for about a month was the wrestlers' protest. Remember that the protesting wrestlers want, right now, one of their premier demands is to have a woman head of the Internal Complaints Committee at Wrestling Federation of India. I had earlier reported, as had other news portals as well, that the internal committee at the Wrestling Federation was not following the law in letter and spirit and was also violating the sports code. Sana, can you tell me, I think his opening thought was that we must draw a fine line between what PoSH aims to achieve and maybe I think the criminal side of sexual harassment and when it actually becomes a cognizable offense. So you are an advocate yourself. Can you tell our guests about it?
Sure. I think it will be helpful to understand firstly what the law says briefly. A lot of times there is a lot of ambiguity amongst the people who are supposed to be implementing it to understand what the law says, whereas the law is pretty crystal clear and straightforward, and in fact provides a lot of options. When it comes to implementation of it and understanding of it, that becomes sometimes a challenge. So I can tell you what, so the law is very clear where it says at least there should be any organization, and any organization means basically it covers a plethora of different types of organizations, including sport federations, trusts, etc. So it says which have 10 or more employees have to have an internal committee in place, which has to be headed by a presiding officer who is a woman. There have to be 2 other employees who preferably need to be from a legal or a social work background. It's not an absolute mandate, preferably. And there has to be an external member from an independent perspective. So these are the broad compliance and very basic requirements when it comes to the constitution of an internal committee. Pretty straightforward. It also goes on to say that if you have various other units as an organization, even those need to have committees so that the practicalities of or practical challenges when it comes to conducting inquiries is taken care of. Why is it mandated and why is it relevant and important to understand that? Because internal committees are the only authority within the organization who are supposed to be looking into complaints of sexual harassment. It's not the management, not the HR. Nobody else can be looking into it by law. In fact, it goes on to say that whatever the IC committee recommends after conducting an inquiry, the management shall. And when a word shall is used in any law, that means it's an absolute mandate, and that's what you need to follow. So it gives immense amount of powers and, in a way, privileges to the internal committee. So how you're going about choosing the members of internal committee and what do that really look like? That's something that the organizations need to be extremely mindful of, because these are highly sensitive matters. I think Gopal sir is back. I'll hand over it to, sort of ask and continue the question regards to sporting federations, Shubhangi.
Right, sir. Good to have you back, sir. You were telling us about...
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just respond. I'm sorry about that network issue, and I think Sana has summed up what I would not have been in a position to share, which are the nitty-gritties of how these things are implemented. I was saying that there's a small line to be drawn between the PoSH Act and its intention, which is to provide protection to women employees at the workspace, right? And the workspace definition is wide, but it's not as wide as I would have liked it to be in the law. We have seen the WCC, the Women in Cinema Collective in Kerala, taking the association, that's Amma, to the Kerala High Court about the fact that women at the workplace in production and film units, they fall between two stools. The definitions in the Act don't seem to cover them. So every time they move from one production unit to another, there seems to be grave issues about how that is covered. Now, it's not something which is limited only to, say, films, but there are many ad hoc kind of establishments and engagements where you would have the same problem. For example, if a woman lawyer in a court is in some way sexually harassed by somebody who is not an employee there, would that fall between two stools again? So we need our laws to be a little more proactive, to be interpreted a little widely, and that doesn't exist at the moment. Coming to your question regarding sports, the Wrestling Federation issue is actually much different from just a PoSH issue. Okay. It's a criminal offense under POCSO, and it shocks me that a complainant in a POCSO case can later be told to have withdrawn his or her statement which was initially made, and therefore they will not proceed with the charge sheet on that. That's something that should have been decided at a much later stage of trial. I feel it was deliberately done to ensure that the arrest doesn't immediately follow as happens in POCSO cases. The other charge sheet which has actually been filed is again about offences under the IPC. So the sexual harassment issue is a little short from there. That's a more civil-oriented exercise which requires the setting up of an independent committee with independent people, etc. Right. Now, I just coincidentally, I was having dinner yesterday with a couple of individuals who've been very high up in the sport of tennis in this country, and they were sharing with me just shocking stories of how women, young girls, in fact, at the age of 12 and 13, have over the not just recently, but over the last 30 or 40 years, have had to put up with the most venal kind of actions by male coaches, male managers, etc., who are always trying to cop feel, trying to physically in some way have contact with them. And this is not true only of this sport, it's true of all sports. In as far as cricket was concerned, about 7 years ago when I was assisting the Lodha committee, we had put a question, in fact, to the secretary and the president of the BCCI at that time about why we have stories coming from the DDCA, the Delhi Cricket Association, of selectors apparently asking for sexual favors from parents of young players. So it is something that is base and venal, and it has been continuing in a very extreme fashion for years. The problem that I see is twofold. One, a lot of oversight is absent. So you have people who put their own nominees on each of these committees. and the independence that you would expect from them has not been forthcoming. The oversight that we expect from the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, which has come out with the National Sports Code, of which a Sexual Harassment Committee is also a part, should have followed up and ensured that penal action is taken against those in charge for not having such committees in place and for not following up on complaints. All along, we are concerned about Brijbhushan and why he's not arrested. We haven't taken Brijbhushan and his entire committee to task for not having a committee in place and for not having independent action being taken there. And this is not true of this one association. It's true of virtually every single association.
Right, sir.
Right?
And
I'm sorry, I've gone on too long. I'll just...
That's all right. You will see that in a story that I had done about the lack of sexual internal complaints committees at various sport federations. Most, in fact, are not complying with the law. And like you said, a lot of times there's lack of independence, lack of oversight, which is what makes it difficult for sportswomen to come forward to raise their complaints in the first place, right? Otherwise, if civic remedy was available, or do you think if compliance was strong, then maybe people like Brijbhushan would not have felt disempowered to go to the lengths that he allegedly went to?
No, but Shubhangi, just consider the fact that right now, what is the message that is going out? We don't have a Supreme Court who is going to suo moto direct that hell. This is a terrible image that is being created for our country. But just because a guy is a member of parliament, he's going to get away with it. His arrest should have been directed immediately. If it was not a member of parliament, if it was just any layman and this kind of issue had arisen, he would have been fighting for bail for 3 years and they would have kept him inside, strongly opposing it. That hasn't happened. We have a situation here where the message that is being sent out to young women athletes in all sports is that if it's going to be a powerful guy at the top, don't complain, don't do anything, nothing is going to happen to him. That's the message that today exists in this country. Let's accept it.
Right. I would like to remind my attendees that we encourage questions from you as well. This discussion has opened on a very passionate, very strong note, and our panelists would be more than happy to answer some of your questions, because remember, this particular act that we are talking about, it is useful for us in everyday life as well. Moving on, Vinta ma'am, you are someone who has taken a lot of ire of her own industry after you voiced your own story. The last time we had spoken, you had told me about some problems with the internal complaints committee proceeding. Now, first, what I want you to probably explain to my attendees is that because you and Aloknath were not part of just one organization, how was an internal complaints committee proceeding set up in the first place? Were those associations that facilitated it? And what happened? Would you be comfortable delving into that fact and tell us about what happened at that committee proceeding?
So basically, what I'll say here is that before the MeToo movement happened, there was I don't think anybody in the film industry at least was even aware of
they weren't.
PoSH Act, or aware that there was something called the ICC or the Internal Complaints Committee, or aware that there was anything like the, some legislation on law. Because until MeToo happened, it was just assumed that this is perks and privileges that men have, correct?
Right.
So, which is why when in 2004 I had voiced my problem in Bombay Times, Urvashi Asher had taken my interview and I had said that this is what has happened with me. There itself, the industry had shut its doors to me. And post that, it was a very big struggle for me to survive in the industry, and I've survived of doing all other work than what I am skilled at. So, having said that, when MeToo happened, that's when people jumped into action, and there were all these like, what you call like this. There was a huddle to kind of put together these committees.
Right.
And there were, of course, a lot of experts who jumped in also to help and who came in also to help. And so, yes, so what you said was right, that I belong to the Directors Association and the Screenwriters Association. Alok Nath belonged to the actors, the CINTA, that's Cine and Television Artists Association, right? And so there needed to be some coordination between the associations, which was not there, and I don't think it's still there. But among the associations that were there, of course, Screenwriters Association came in immediately to support me and said, we will stand by you. But then the association on its own doesn't have any teeth. It cannot do anything. It can only say, yeah, we are in support of you. It cannot take any action on your behalf. It doesn't have that in it as a part of its association's, what do you call it? The whole articles of association do not permit them to do anything.
Right.
As far as the Directors Association went, that was the same problem. They were not, and there was a reluctance also from the Directors Association to do anything. They were actually trying to protect the people the men who had been called out. So there was that kind of an action taking place on that end. And where CINTA was concerned, they immediately swung into action, and they immediately called, and they had the right to call me, because the complaint was the person I'd spoken against was an actor. So they needed to hear my side of the story, and I went willingly and did that. And when they invited Alok Nath to come in and speak on his behalf, he did not turn up. They gave him 2 or 3 chances. He did not turn up. And by that, they were able to ban him from working for the next number of years. So that was where they had like kind of swung into action and done something about it. And I must say that CINTA was extremely, extremely active and very proactive, in fact, and made sure that all of these things happened fast. But having said that, that was where it also ended for the film industry. I think once the things, I think things just start moving and start getting talked about. MeToo's now also become like an anniversary situation, right? So every October, November, when those days start coming, there's a lot of like conversation around in media about MeToo, and that's when the conversation kind of starts happening in the industry as well. But I don't think anybody takes PoSH seriously. I don't know about any other industry, but I know about the film and television industry, where it is another, as it is as a society and a culture, we are a very non-compliant, we have a very non-compliant attitude. So we can't view PoSH in isolation. It has to be seen in context to society and culture.
Right.
If the society and culture are sensitive to it, it will be implemented correctly. And if the society and culture are callous towards it, PoSH will face adversity. And how can we expect to see PoSH working in a micro level when on the macro stage, we are one huge theater of absurd? On the one hand, we are seeing Bilkish Bano's rapist being released from prison and then celebrated. The theater of lynchers being acquitted and welcomed with garlands by a union minister. Theater of Olympian wrestlers whom you were just talking about, who complain against the president of the Wrestling Federation of India, but they get abused on the other side, and the perpetrator is given enough time to clean his act, and gets photographed on the same day when they are being mishandled by the police. With impunity, he gets photographed on the inauguration of the new parliament building.
So
endless delay. So all of these things, when we expect, like at a film industry level or at business level, we expect that how PoSH can be implemented. It cannot be implemented if the message that we are sending out on a national media is that the highest offices don't have any respect for PoSH.
Right, ma'am.
And so it's a wrong thing to expect that SMEs and MSMEs, which are largely production houses in the film and television industry, would be bothered. They are getting more muscle. In fact, they are getting more excited that dekh liya na MeToo ka kya hua.
Right.
That is the reality which
Right.
everybody is facing on the ground level.
Right. So moving on, Sana, like Vinta just told us that two different associations came together to hear a case. How does this happen in the cinema industry? Are trade associations supposed to have a PoSH committee in the first place? How, like, can you tell us the adaptability of the act in this very fluid industry?
Sure. And I think that's a very pertinent question to also ask and understand what Vinta just said about how it panned out. And that's the best Sinta could do because it was a trade union and trade union doesn't have employees. What its law is applicable to is employees. They have members. And there's only so much you can do to your members. You can expel them from membership, right? That's that. Sinta went above and beyond. That as well is what I understand. So while that is great, but where the action should have happened really, or where the implementation should have been taken care of are the production houses when it comes to PoSH Act, right? So production houses, media houses, in my experience, they have compliances. I'm not going to name any of them, obviously, but it also depends on their whole attitude and approach towards this law, which I think it's patchy. I don't think I want to be cynical because I'm in it for a long time now. And I do understand that it's very, very different for different organizations. I have media houses who are completely committed to the cause, who also want to engage in conversations around inclusivity, diversity, and including trans persons and other communities within the PoSH ambit. And not just implement it, but also ensure that these cases are heard expeditiously. As opposed to there are also production houses who are completely lax about it because business takes precedence. You have these deadlines, you have projects which you need to complete, and if there is an act which happens during the project, then what takes precedence? The timelines and the deadlines and the money that needs to come out of the project, or the compliance part of it that we can take care of later. That's the attitude. Which is again debatable, but that's how it is. I mean, you need to, as it all is a top-down effect. What the management needs to do and what the management needs to understand. I also want to highlight about the criminal side of things, right? This is as Mr. Sankaranaryanan also mentioned, this is a civil case, and that's absolutely right. The law itself provides for impetus, in fact, support and assistance by an employer to an aggrieved to file a police complaint. It goes above and beyond. It says that you have to assist. What is assistance is very subjective. That's nowhere defined. But nonetheless, it does provide that as a remedy. So nothing stops the aggrieved from going the civil route as well as a criminal complaint route, right? And I also want to mention one specific thing when it comes to the film and media industry is the fact that you are among the few industries where child labor in a way is allowed, where children are also actively engaging, right? And the PoSH law, which is an out-and-out criminal law, which has a provision for mandatory reporting. That means that if you are in the know of any child sexual abuse and you sit on it, even you can be made accused in the case of PoSH. That's how far it goes. It's a specialized law, which I can tell you with some responsibility that a lot of production houses and media houses are not aware of. And then there is this intersectionality of child artists, and then who's supposed to look into it? The PoSH committee should be looking into it, or should be PoSH? It's both. And then what about the PoSH committee sensitivity in handling a child sexual abuse case, which is a very specialized and high sensitivity issue? So these are some of the problems when it comes to this industry, especially in terms of the redressal of complaints. Right. If they are firstly reaching the appropriate authority, that is nowhere advertised, and then redressing it, that's another ball game altogether.
Okay. I would like to take a moment to remind my attendees again, our esteemed subscribers, that please do send in some questions. This is a complicated issue, and we would like more and more participation so that our panelists who are experts here can answer your questions. Moving on, Somabha, you are the co-founder of unmute.help. Like I said, it's a resource center for performing artists. within performing arts, one of the most complicated dichotomies is this guru shishya relationship. Like in any other field, even in sports, even if my coach is powerful, but he's not my bhagwan. In performing arts, I'm told that my guru is my bhagwan. How do you challenge a bhagwan? And so what happens at these cultural institutes? Like right now, Kalakshetra is a burning issue. um, what stops, like how, first just tell me how suppressing this guru shishya relationship can turn out to be.
Thank you, Shubhangi, for that question. And I think I would like to start by saying that, the different things that we were discussing here all were in some sense, some structured. But the performing arts industry in itself, it's called an industry as such, but there is no structure. So you do not really have a foundation or an association or a union, where you can come together or voice, or you can even start a movement. And I think that's where the issue of this non-palpability, or there's nothing that you can really feel that exists, which is quintessential for the PoSH Act and also for several other legislations which require a platform to be there from where you step in and you say. So everything that is there with regard to the PoSH Act for performing artists is very much person specific or individual specific.
Right.
So now the PoSH Act in itself is about an institution. And if it's not an institute, if it's an institution less than 10, then what do you do? But there is an institution, but here there is none. That's the first issue and the first problem. Now, the second is, because it is a Guru Shishya Parampara that we have followed primarily, be it in dance industry or in the music industry, a vocal or instrument, that aspect, as you said, of Guru and Shishya, of course, has always been there. But the difficulty has been that because of that kind of a fiduciary relationship, no one really questioned anything. Now, because there was lack of questioning, no one, when I say no one, I mean the performing artists, they were never aware of laws. Forget about PoSH or POXO or anything else. Law or the legal sphere, the legal world was something which was absolutely alien to them. And now, how do I say this? I say this because as people say that, I am the bridge between the arts and the law, because I am a trained dancer, classical Manipuri dance artist, and I am a trained lawyer. Though I don't practice law, I teach law. So, I understand the issue that happens, so I don't blame the performing artists, and at the same time, maybe I don't blame the legal fraternity, but there is a gap. So today we are talking about the gap in the implementation of the act. But when Unmute happened, that was because we felt that there is a gap between the legal fraternity and the performing arts community. So Unmute is that platform that tries to bridge the gap. And today when I sit here with all of you, and the fact that I'm representing Unmute, it is a milestone for Unmute and all the performing artists of India, because the fact that this issue is something which has been suppressed, as you said, Shubhangi, is a fact. And today, when Unmute has happened, we are here equally talking about the plight of the performing artists with that of the music in the film industry, with that of the media, with that of sports. So that is where the primary issue with the performing arts industry has always been. And Unmute is trying to, they're trying to take out or pull literally the artists from that cocoon and to come and voice that. So Kalakshetra is one example where that happened. So the fact that, Guru Shishya Param, Guru cannot do anything and everything, the Guru also needs to have some restraint. And restraint of what kind? That really came to life. And it was not, Kalakshetra is something that is very recent. Again, you had the Gundecha brothers case that happened. There was an incident in Kolkata, which actually was the triggering factor for Unmute. And also recently, again, in Kolkata, a theater group also, one of the directors of the theater group has been accused also. So you see, people are coming out. And also, let me tell you this, that it's a very sad fact that in India, in the performing arts industry, this reality of some kind of sexual abuse of the artists, women mostly, has been the norm for a long time. That is how it has been. It has been normalized. It took a really long time for the performing artists to really understand that no, we have a right to really protest. We have a right to voice for what we want and what we do not want. Now, people might criticize it as something in a Western position or anything, but well, it is the right as a human being to live with dignity. That's it.
Do you think the fallout of the Kalakshetra issue, there have been positive developments in the sense that the main accused was arrested because the complainant finally thought it fit that she should file an FIR, she should file a police complaint. But online, there has been a fallout where this has been called a leftist agenda and attack on Indian traditions because of how close Kalakshetra as an institute is within the performing arts community as well as outside of it. Do you think it will disempower students going forward, or do you think this has been an empowering story to be broken?
I think this is a very difficult question because, when I was a child, when I was in school, we were told about the good touch and the bad touch. We did not have CCTV cameras in our school buses or in the staff room or, in the corridors and all of that. And I have not graduated like some 30 years back. But see, situations have changed. So the kind of attitude with which the parents also try to really look after their children, they're protective. So they are protective everywhere, including in the performing arts spaces. So on one hand, there could be people who would be skeptical. But at the same time, as a performing artist now, I would say that the charm and the passion with which one learns the performing arts is something which will definitely gear them to continuing learning the dance form or the music or the tradition of the instrument or the painting that they do. So I don't think it will stop, but that will be stopped. But I think what will happen is that people will be more aware. And the stakeholders would be more aware, the stakeholders would be more concerned, they would be called out for if they are not following the procedures. So, that accountability, that answering, the questions that you ask, that will happen, which would not happen earlier. So the parents could not question the guru as to why are you keeping my child late in the night? Because the guru would also know that, well, if I do something like this, I might be called out for, let's say, a POXO case or a PoSH Act. So, what these have done is it has empowered all the stakeholders, not just the parents, the students, but also everybody else. Let's say even the cleaner of a performing arts space, the security guard, everybody. So it is something that we have to take positively. But negativity would be there always. But I think, it's the arts. If you are into it, you just go on.
So,
Can I just respond to what Somabha said? I had a thought myself, which is this. I'm shocked that anybody is criticizing these kind of initiatives as saying it's leftist. If it is leftist, then I'm very happy to be a leftist. If protecting our women is supposed to be a leftist agenda. But this is a question really for Somabha, if I may. Do you feel that there is a kind of sectoral application of mind which is required in our lawmaking, which appears to be absent? Because from what I hear from you, we're talking about these individual guru shishya kind of paramparas, where it's not an entire industry as a whole. Each guy, each guru, each leader in different parts of the country may function their own way, etc. But like with what Vinita faced, right? You have very strong, well-entrenched industry groups, right? And who are looking at loyalists. So if you buck the trend and if you come out with a story, they'll start, getting together to try and oppose you. We have seen that in recent months. There's been a story about Delhi cricket, and you don't find it covered by anybody in the press. We know what the story is, but nobody's talking about it. Now, there are certain industries where you have one or two or three big actors who will then just get together and suppress these voices. Do you feel that that's something that you're seeing in your own industry? That's one. And the second I wanted to ask you is, have you seen the kind of reaction when you protest things like this, that the gurus then start getting together and say, why should we get women shishyas if this kind of problem arises? It's something I was told when I was taking women juniors, because ours is a male heavy profession for many years, lawyers. Right now my wife and I, we have joint chambers where we have 6 juniors, all women, fantastic at what they do. But there's always these kind of, discordant voices who sit there and say, why take women? Yeah, they're a headache. I mean, do you come across stories like that?
First of all, I think to answer the first question with regard to the sectoral application of the laws, I feel that when I started my law education, that's where I tried to do the intersectionality all the time, which is why intellectual property rights regime one, which I have time and again tried to relate it to the performing arts industry, because that is again something which is what again Unmute does also, which is absolutely without any specificities and nuances for the protection of performing artists. And performing artists, when I say having a definition of what is performer and performance and having a definition of what is performance rights is not sufficient. How do you really effectuate it? It was only until a very recent case from anyway, this is not a platform where we discuss that, but I just wanted to say that yes, sectoral application is essential, which is why we need to have special laws or at least special application. No one takes the initiative of trying to empower these people who are a very important part of taking forward the cultural heritage and tradition of India. How many of us as performing artists sign contracts? We rarely do. How Doordarshan does. NCPA Mumbai does. But a local organizer, let me also tell you that performing artists, most of them perform on platforms which are not really organized again. So what if they had said you're going to be paid 10,000 for a performance, but you're paid only 5,000? So I'm talking about not in lakhs, but I'm talking about in thousands. So there is no accountability. So those kind of issues are there, which is why sectoral application has to be there. And that is why same goes with PoSH also. Even though it's mentioned that vocational training and all institutes would be covered within the PoSH, it is, I do know, I can possibly say maybe 10 or maximum 20 institutions across India would have ICC formed for performing artists. Now, which means even dance schools need to have ICCs. Do we have that? I don't think so. We have it. Every dance company needs to have it. They don't. And mind you, girls and boys who are young artists, they need to earn. They need to feed their tummies and their families. So they do not care about whether they have ICC or not. We'll see that later. Let us simply perform and earn. And I think that's where the exploitativeness of the industry is, which was, I think, the case for a lot of other industries until a recent time.
Same thing with
Same with
the
the film industry. I have heard this.
Your priority is to earn your money, and you have to survive, and you have to live in a city like Mumbai, and you have a ambition to be somebody. All of those things come together in that's where you become vulnerable, right? And that's how you get exploited. But that's how it is, not in performing arts and film industry and every other industry.
Those
And
are all.
so much of our industry is in the non-formal sector, where there is nothing like PoSH or implementation of these laws.
Those are all very important points that panelists have raised today. For the want of time, I'm going to start asking questions that attendees, as very important subscribers, have sent us. So first, Sana, I think this question will be a perfect fit for you. She's an anonymous attendee. I'm sorry for they are an anonymous attendee, if I may say so. So if this person asks, if as a student counselor, I get to know of sexual harassment happening within my institute, what is my mandatory stance and or voluntary stance to be taken? What is my liability?
It's an interesting question, because the concern is again where there is a partial concern for the aggrieved, there's also partial concern for self, and that's where the problem lies, right? You should not be afraid to raise voice against somebody else. I mean, and that only goes to show the fear that is ingrained in people's mind to calling out instances like this, right? What if there is an implication on me? But I'll answer that question as far as the mandatory and the voluntary part is concerned. As far as the mandatory part is concerned, yes, you can. So, legally speaking, there has to be in that particular institute where the person is a counselor at. If there is an internal committee, then there can be an on behalf complaint filed with the written consent of the person, right? So that student counselor can sort of egg on this aggrieved woman and say, okay, look, there is a committee, educate her because she's a counselor. Counselors are quite, apprised with a lot of internal protocols and policies anyway. So she's the best person to guide and nudge the aggrieved in the right direction to become a formal complainant under the law. And, but of course, with the caveats like there will be confidentiality, it cannot be anonymous, it has to be something, and it can be anonymous because there is objective inquiry that needs to happen in place again as per law, right? Because you have to hear both sides. So that's why, they can nudge the person, the counselor. As far as implication or liability on them lies, it's not like the POXO law, unfortunately. Fortunately, like if you know about an instance and there could be a liability on you and could be consequences for you, and you chose to sort of brush it under the carpet or not talk about it, whatever the case may be. In this case, in PoSH, there is no liability for a whistleblower or a lack of a whistleblower for that matter as well. So I do not, so the voluntary part is remaining voluntary, but the mandatory part only limits to the wish and whim of the aggrieved to agree in writing for an on behalf complaint, and ultimately to be educated and sort of, told that this is what will happen, and that's how inquiries usually pan out. It should be an informed decision that the aggrieved woman should take, because a lot of times in my experience, I've seen that the aggrieved women file an application or give a complaint with an assumption that, oh, if it's not to be taken care of, everything will happen on its own. It doesn't work like that. There are timelines. You have to know that there are options. You will be formally called to record your statement. The other side also gets an opportunity to bring their witnesses, documents, and there's a whole process to it. And for a reason, and rightly so. So again, all of that educative and awareness part of that element or sensitization on this law is mandated for a reason, for this very reason. It's also a compliance requirement, interestingly.
Right.
So I think that's how it should be looked at, if to answer that counselor's question.
So another subscriber, Radhika Shah, Gopal sir, she has a question for you. In your opinion, what improvements or amendments can be made to enhance the effectiveness of the PoSH Act?
There are several, and I'll tell you from a lawyer's point of view. I put myself in the shoes of the perpetrator, and I was looking at it and wondering what are the various objections I would take, right? I'd first say that because the definition is very, very narrow, you have to first ensure that it is at a workplace, which is a very narrow definition. You have to look at the corporeal entity, the corporation, the firm, etc., who's charged with that, and see whether it in fact took place in the workplace. Then I can imagine that my powerful clients will lean on this poor victim and tell her, please accept the conciliation, which is one of the mechanisms provided in the Act. And she may think of her future and say, okay, and settle it by way of a conciliation. I find these two extremely problematic, and I'll tell you what else I find problematic. I find problematic that the Act is available only for an aggrieved woman, right? It's not unusual for us to imagine situations where men can be in a position where they can be harassed. You remember that Michael Douglas film?
That happened at Kalakshetra, sir. Males.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, when an act is made, and an act is made of recent vintage in 2013-14, surely you should consider the fact that it doesn't have to be only women who can be the victims. There can be men also. I've heard of an instance where there was a Bharatanatyam student, a male, who was harassed by a male guru. and there was an effort. They consulted with a lawyer who said, I'm sorry, this act is not available for you. Now, surely those are things which require tweaking, but that's not the reason why we should say that the act has problems. The act has several other problems, and for me, the technical issues which arise with workplace definitions and the role of conciliations are major issues that need to be addressed, right? This is apart from, at the stage of implementation, the other problems that we are seeing. The deterrence that you have when you're at a workplace and somebody who is in a position of power is able to exercise that kind of influence against you. Right? Those are things which have to be seriously addressed, and I think the act needs a kind of rehaul where you will empower victims and you will ensure that very strong penalties are imposed on the workplace itself and the employers. That has to be done, because in this country, as we have seen, unless you have something that shocks you, it won't work. In Chennai, for example, I find that now they're taking they have cameras right across the roads, and the minute you cross 40 kilometers, you get a photo of you sitting there in the car going beyond 40, and you get a 3,000 rupee fine. Suddenly, there's a deterrent. You see cars all going at a snail's pace in Chennai, and me as an outsider coming in trying to figure out why that's happening. Deterrence is the only thing that will work. So if you tell the company that you have to pay 5 crores as a fine in case there is such an incident which is brought to light, these guys will ensure that they will try and clean up their act at least to some degree.
But sir, I have a question there. If a company has to pay a penalty if someone is found guilty of sexual harassment, these committees set up by the company will never find anyone guilty.
No. It's not for finding a person guilty. Surely you can't penalize the company. If the company has a sexual harassment committee in place, the sexual harassment committee conducts its inquiry properly, finds guilty, you're not going to penalize the company for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You will penalize the company for not discharging its obligations. The obligation of ensuring that there is a code, the obligation that information has been given, the obligation that natural justice is followed, that every employee knows these rights, knows who the members are, knows that there's a counselor that you can meet and you can have your complaint put across, etc. And when you were talking about the ignorance, let me shock you with a fact. In 1997, the Supreme Court decided in the case of a Rajasthan social worker who had been raped in Vishaka, they laid down guidelines for the sexual harassment at the workplace, citing the CEDAW Convention in BJ, etc., etc. Did anybody bother asking the Supreme Court whether it itself implemented those guidelines? They set up their first sexual harassment committee nearly 16 years after they themselves laid down guidelines. So this dragging your feet business is not only true of companies and small workshops, etc. If the Supreme Court, which laid down the guidelines, didn't bring its own committee into place, right, then we have a serious problem on our hands.
Right. So there's another question by a subscriber, Celia B. She's joining us from the United States of America. She asks, does the law apply countrywide? Are there some states in India that apply the law more than other states? As far as I know, every workplace with 10 or more than 10 employees need to have an internal complaints committee in place. If employees are less than 10, or if it's not a strict workplace, then a complainant can always approach the district magistrate where there is a committee and seek redressal. But since I have 3 lawyers on my panel, Somabha, was that explanation fine, or is there something you want to add to that answer?
I think, first of all, I will start with what Gopal sir just mentioned about the implementation. But we do have an amount, a penalty that has been prescribed for not setting up of ICC. But no one really knows about the fact that that kind of a provision exists. Now, that happens because no one is not really aware of the fact that this law exists. And even if they know about the title of the law, they do not know the contents of it. So, it is very important that we need to have a mechanism whereby these stakeholders are made accountable for not setting up the ICC or not following the procedure of the ICC, which includes the timelines also. Now, having said that, we need to possibly have a stricter mechanism and greater punishment penalties, which have to be also monitored whether those are taking place or not. Now, to come to your question, following one of the attendees, question here, how many of us really know whether we actually have that LCC constituted or not? When we do these, training programs from Unmute for performing artists, we are often asked this question that, well, what do I do? I'm not really employed in any institution as such. What do I do? So then we say that, you go to the LCC. So the question that they ask is, can you please tell me where is the LCC? Or who is this LCC? So either those LCC their tenure has already lapsed, which had come into force from when, let's say, 2013 or 14, when it came into effect. After that, what has happened, no one really knows. So, well, it is true that you do have that mechanism in place, but there are states where those are functional, but in several other states, those are not really functional. And even if those are in pockets of those states, those are functional. So again, it goes
I'm
back to
sorry
that.
to cut in, Somabha, but if you could just explain for the viewers because they wouldn't know this, the ICC and the LCC and what they do.
So the ICC is where where an institution or an organization or a workplace has more than 10 members, then they can constitute. They are bound to constitute an ICC with a certain number of members, with a senior female employer as the chairperson and all of that. But in case it is less than 10, then you do have a mechanism called Local Complaints Committee under the Act itself, which is to be constituted by, as of course the laws say that, the appropriate authority. So it is the district magistrate who would be usually in charge of constituting the LCC with female members and members with or people with good record and all of that. They will have, the district magistrate will have to constitute that committee, wherein anybody can go and complain about the sexual harassment that has happened at her workplace, irrespective of the number of members and all of that. And the same procedure would then be followed under the guidance of the district magistrate. So that's the Local Complaints Committee. But that has to be notified. It is not notified. And even if it has been, let's say, notified, after it lapses, there is no renewal of it in several states. So,
Right. So we'll have to wrap up our session now. Thank you all for joining us. But before we leave, Vinta ma'am, regarding the film industry specifically, and of course the larger society, since you were such a strong voice in the MeToo movement, even that, if I can say so, seem to have failed in making our workplaces better. What else can women do? No, women shouldn't do anything in the first place, but what can we do?
So I've just made a film called Shout, which is a 90-minute feature-length documentary film, soon going to be released. And I've traveled the length and breadth of this country and met people, very much by the points made by other panelists here, that we cannot limit PoSH only to women. I think the larger problem which needs addressal needs to be addressed is patriarchy, because patriarchy is what impacts everybody. And unfortunately, and this is going to be slightly you might call it a leftist thinking, or you might say it's non-technical and non-legal here, but we need to understand that when we are talking of patriarchy, it's impacting each and everybody. And the way we are structured in organizations and as businesses and as a society as a whole, or a government as a whole, everything works in hierarchical sort of patterns, with the result that when you look at the higher you are in that hierarchical order, the safer you are. That's the reality of our world today. And the lower you are of that hierarchical order, The more vulnerable you are, the more unsafe you are, the more in danger you are. And this is not limited only to women. This cuts across all genders and everybody.
Right.
As a man today, I mean, why is the burden on my shoulders if I'm a man for the safety of women? Why do I have to look after the women in my house and look after them and make sure that they remain safe? It's not fair. So somewhere we have to really, like Gopal sir said, and the others are also saying on the panel, including you, that we have to relook and make it more, bring in broader realities into the picture, and definitely look at the societal, cultural, systemic issues that are there, instead of just, the technicalities. And it is not, I mean, I think all of us will agree here in this panel that I don't think the number of complaints that should have come after the implementation of PoSH have come. Women are afraid to go there and complain. They will not. And whether it's women or men, even if a man had that privilege to be able to complain against a harassment, he would not, because people want to not make, it's still not culturally acceptable. You become a joke, a butt of gossip. You are definitely a person who's, putting your own job at risk. So there's so many factors. Somewhere I think, next discussion when you have Shubhangi, all of us should talk about these factors as well.
Right. So,
Can I just say one small thing?
Sure.
I think a lot of credit goes to those who support instances like this. I'm glad that, for example, Print as a media house is taking up this issue and talking about it and giving voice to those who have been affected. I think we have seen a lack of support from big media houses, and we are happy to see it coming here. I think it's also important that slowly we can hopefully see industry rallying around and supporting victims. I mean, I didn't see the kind of boycotting that happened of Kevin Spacey and co happening over here. Right? They remade an entire film with the replacement actor, which I have not seen any such instances in India. It's about time we got a spine among our industry heads so that they decided to back the victims. It's about time. Let's see when that happens.
Before wrapping up, I just want to inform my attendees that students of Kalakshetra have in fact approached Madras High Court, a group of aggrieved students. These are male students who were allegedly exploited by their teachers, and they want PoSH to become a gender neutral law. So that initiation has already happened. Before parting ways, I want to thank you all for subscribing to us. Without you all, a reporter like me would not be able to go to Bombay, Chennai, Chandigarh for such long investigative projects. Each of these stories took at least 5 to 6 days of reporting, followed by research, followed by follow-ups, etc., etc. Most media houses today do not have those kind of resources to invest in their reporters. So it is readers and viewers like you who are facilitating good journalism that very few today are trying to uphold. So thank you so much, subscribers. Thank you for sending in your questions and for your time. Thank you, panelists, for your precious time again. And I hope we can stay in touch. And thank you for your valuable inputs. Thank you so much.